back. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again here today. This is the 9th annual Startup Boston Week. Our mission with this conference is simple. It is to bring together the entire startup community across every industry, department, and funding stage. Startup Boston exists to connect, educate, and celebrate this ecosystem while serving as a trusted, unbiased guide to the best resources that can help you start and scale your startup. I'm Harish, and I'm going to continue being your host today. Before we dive in, my first big thanks to Suffolk University for hosting us. Suffolk University has generously partnered with us for the past 3 years, and they have provided us with this space in kind because of their deep commitment towards supporting Boston's startup community. So if you're interested in exploring entrepreneurship with Suffolk, they offer a variety of programs and opportunities. Be sure to stop by their table in the vendor hall on the 5th floor, and you can learn how they can support your journey and how you can also get involved in supporting their entrepreneurial programs and students. So thank you so much once again for being here, and on to the session.
That's good. Thank you. And a round of applause for Suffolk. So I gave a quick introduction. I'm Doug Williams. I'm at the MIT Center for Entrepreneurship. We're really the Center for Entrepreneurship Education. So we try to bring all the disciplines together and all the schools together. So the getting the business students with the grad students in the labs with the undergrad, and that's sort of the alchemy. And that's also one of the big wins of Boston, is getting that alchemy. So glad to have you all here participating. And I've had the good fortune of benefiting from this community in attracting talent, as well as getting great advice. When we were scaling Runkeeper, we went to Localytics, both to get mobile monitoring, but also to understand what scale really meant. We had 50 million users. They had billions, trillions of data points. And so that's again, the strength of the Boston community, which Kara and Scott have seen as well. I'll let them introduce themselves, and Kara and then Scott, if you could introduce yourself, talk about your background, what you're doing, how you've gotten into AI, and some of the AI communities. You and I are on some of the Boston AI communities.
Yes.
Kara?
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Kara Peterson. I'm the co-founder of Describe AI, which is a legal tech startup here in Boston. I also host the Building AI Boston podcast, because once I started being an entrepreneur in this environment, I just kind of fell in love with the ecosystem. It's really the best place in the world, I think, to be building an AI company. And did anyone see the news out of our new economic development secretary today and the BBJ? Okay, so I'm going to read it to you. He started the job, Eric Paley, people know him? Okay, so he started the job on September 2nd, and he's saying that just like Hasbro, OpenAI is going to be moving its headquarters here. That doesn't mean they are. He's making the pitch. He's saying Boston is the #1 place. So let's go, OpenAI. Come on, Sam, let's come to Boston. But that may sound silly, but I really think Boston is a special place to be building for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is the place you're sitting right now is, Suffolk Law School, where I actually used to work. I used to run marketing here back in the day. But it's just an example of the higher education sort of depth and breadth we have in this city that just brings so much to our region in terms of brilliant people and really, socially conscious and interesting young folks coming and hopefully not leaving us for the other coast. But if anyone in this room, I know there's some of you here who've heard of AI Blueprint for Massachusetts. Awesome. Okay. So if you don't know that and you're interested in AI in this region, definitely check it out. It's a wonderful group. It's just volunteers, and what you get if you do a lot of work for them is a bracelet. So it's really, really high payoff. So it's basically a bunch of volunteers who come together to just sort of build the ecosystem here. It's not that different than Startup Boston in some ways, that it's people who really believe it in the community. So I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I spent most of my life in higher education, working at most of the institutions you probably know. A brief time at MIT, was at Harvard, was at BU, was at BC, basically everywhere. And then because of a personal experience, realized that there was a very nice marriage of case law research, which is probably not that exciting unless there's anybody here. Any law students in here today? Any Suffolk law students? No, okay. My recommendation, if you ever need a lawyer, get a Suffolk lawyer because they know how to fight. But anyway, so realize that AI, the marriage of AI and legal were a perfect marriage, despite the idea of having all your clients be attorneys, which maybe isn't the best idea in the world, and not exactly welcoming change or liking risk. So anyhow, can talk about that more as we go, but really saw a problem that AI could actually help solve instead of starting with AI and looking for a problem. So we're in a really good position. We've been around for about 2 years. And the past 30 to 45 days have been insane. Like there's something going on in the market right now. It's really interesting. So we've just rolled out into 350 law schools. We're being called the new case text, which was sold for Thomson Reuters for 650 million in 2023. And we're just having a lot of fun and holding onto our hats. So if you're thinking about building and scaling, we're a 2-person company that's completely self-funded. And we are quite literally taking on the giants. So if I did it, you can do it. So look forward to talking about what your ideas are.
In 2 people.
Two people.
A lot of people are looking for how to find a co-founder. How did you find your co-founder?
Well, okay, this is not really probably going to apply to everybody, but I'm married to him. And he's the
And she
engineer.
seems to be happy,
Yeah,
as
we're
best
doing
I
okay.
can tell.
We haven't killed each other yet, but yeah. So he's engineering, and I'm marketing and business development and all that. And obviously, you're not always going to be married to the person you want to start a company with, but it is really important to find someone that you have compatible and not completely overlapping skills, because really, really, really good engineers probably aren't great at marketing necessarily, right? And vice versa. So we always joke, if either one of us wasn't here, we would not be where we are. So find your complement, right? Find the lid for your pot is my advice. And they're out there and they're looking for you too. So
And we give advice as you're thinking about it. It is sort of a marriage, so don't treat the relationship lightly. You don't have to literally be married, but it is important to have that compatibility.
yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott?
Sure. Hi, my name is Scott Weller. I am the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of a company called NFI. NFI is focused on building agentic systems for commercial, credit, banks, and private credit funds. And so ultimately, we want to make sure more businesses get funded faster with credit. I started the company and got interested in AI. I think that was the question. Primarily because in my career, I've focused heavily on big data, business intelligence, artificial intelligence, building companies that I like to say get the data right. The last company was called Session M. We were a company here in Boston, about 320 people. We built that company up, became a global enterprise SaaS company that basically helped large enterprises understand their transaction data through their point of sale systems and through their card rails. And we helped companies like Starbucks, American Airlines, and a lot of enterprises run and launch their loyalty programs at scale globally. We sold that company MasterCard in 2019 and became a division of MasterCard right during the pandemic, which was awesome. We did a bunch of stuff around AI, but mostly around understanding the data, understanding how to process the data, predicting customer interests, wants, needs for the behalf of our customers.
And would the Session M look different if you were doing it now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do think it would have been a different, more efficient endeavor. I think we spent a lot of time with people wrangling and understanding data, and a lot of the modern AI models are fantastically great at data processing and ETL and a variety of other things. So we had huge teams that just all they did was work with large enterprises to figure out what the data was that they had, so we could process it. My interest, though, in what I call modern agentic systems, however, I would say while I was at MasterCard, I became a head of product and a general manager. And MasterCard, means you're a CEO. So I went from being a CTO to a CEO, and I started to think about things like, how do we scale and sell more of this product? And so I started looking at companies that were using AI models differently than us. We ended up acquiring a company called Dynamic Yield, and their application AI was super interesting to me. And I started looking at like how could we be using AI differently across the enterprise. We did a huge project on AI. Um, Meanwhile, Silicon Valley Bank crashed, and I had been doing stuff in the Boston ecosystem around helping friends startups navigate this challenge around moving their money within 24 hours. Turns out that if you're a viable business and you have revenue and you have credit with a bank, you can't just move your money because you likely have covenants that say if you move your money, move your accounts, you have to pay back your loan or loans. And so we had some startups that were viable companies that were frightened by what was happening with Silicon Valley Bank and trying to get new loans written by other banks so they could actually pay off their loan and do the shell game. And we just learned that that takes a long time for certain credit products. And so my co-founder and I were helping these startups, and we were trying to figure out like, why is credit so slow for companies? For a personal loan, you can go online and get pre-approved in minutes. But for companies, it could take weeks or months to get certain credit lines from banks. So that just threw me into this, as a technologist, into this, trying to answer that question, and started playing around with agentic approaches to doing that. And so ultimately that led to launching NFI. But that interest in using more agentic approaches was really around how can we create software that can anticipate use cases we never saw before. That is like the fundamental, I would say, value proposition of agentic software versus non-agentic software. And we'll talk more about that, I think.
Yeah, that's great. And you gave me the opening. We're supposed to talk about pricing as part of this, and you're a technologist, so you're going to get a pricing question. So giving you a heads up, and everyone else will go. And Joseph, welcome. Thank you for being here. And if you could give your background and then how you ended up on an AI panel, why that's relevant.
Hey everyone, they can hear me. Yes, my name's Joe Adu. I've been so recently I was a chief technology officer of a small company called Spectrum AI, which operates in the autism space. And so we build technology to help people who work with children on the autism spectrum, service providers. We give them better technical tools, so bringing modern technology to help these providers provide better therapy, better care to the children who need it, and ultimately leading to more measurable outcomes. A little bit of my background in terms of what led me there. I've always just believed in trying to apply technology in a way that helps people. I've always tried to ask the so what question about technology. And so it's been more about that journey that sort of led me through a few different places. But my first sort of real taste of like being part of like building technology in the Boston area was when I worked at care.com about 15 plus years ago. Being part of that journey, it was very energizing. It was super exciting to be a part of that process. But that's really what like spurred my interest.
You work with Donna?
I remember Donna. Yep. Yeah. And Sheila.
Donna
and,
Levine heads up Babson's entrepreneurship program. We were together last night.
She's one of their co-founders. Yeah.
So care.com was women founded,
Yeah.
and one of the big Boston success companies that really made a meaningful difference in the lives of a lot of the users, but also the founding team is very close. So.
Exactly. Yeah. It was an awesome experience. But after that experience, that's when it became clear to me that I wanted to pursue that type of journey. And so I just sort of worked in trying to get myself into what's going to be the next care.com, but at an earlier phase where I can have more of an impact. Ultimately, that led me to Spectrum, before Spectrum, Path AI, which is also a Boston-based company. What's cool about Path AI was, following the same sort of theme of like technology that has a purpose. The purpose at Path AI was applying machine learning to help get insights about cancer, right? And so you take a digital scan of a pathology slide and you run it through a computer, and then you can run computer vision on that and identify patterns and such. Turns out to be an amazing application for computer vision. This was all before LLMs were a household name. And so that's a company that was actually building its own computer vision models And my role there was built an IT team, ran the security program. But the cool thing is I really got to help lay the groundwork for the infrastructure that the machine learning work was done in. And we had to work on things like pricing, not so much from the how do you price it for customers, but what are the inputs into the pricing, right? And the cost drivers of machine learning models and all of that. After that, I really wanted to keep doing similar kind of work, and an investor kind of connected me to the founding team at Spectrum AI, which was a company that wasn't building AI, but a company that wanted to apply AI in the field, which is like the two distinctions there. So it's been a really cool experience to be at Spectrum. And with my previous experience at Path AI, I feel like I was really able to bring in, the perspectives of like, what does it mean to actually leverage machine learning systems and product development. We recently, about a couple of weeks ago, actually just got acquired by the market leader, Central Reach. And so I no longer work in Spectrum AI. I'm now part of a bigger company in a slightly different role. I'm now the Chief Information Security Officer, which is a hat that I've worn. One of the great things about startups is you get to wear many different hats. It's actually be one of the appealing, one of the big draws of startups for me. And so,
And you have hats, but you also have experience because you have to
yeah.
do all the things the hats relate to. So yeah.
Yeah, so I'm happy to be here and be part of this panel and share whatever I can and learn from the other panelists and hear your questions about any of what's been shared.
Perfect. And Joe, I'm gonna you'll get the second question. I'm gonna lead on the trust side. So in Path AI, the pathologists all do it all by hand. So they were very accepting, and I'm sure in autism there's concern. So you'll be getting that. But Kara, you'll get the first one. So the panel is standing out in the AI crowd. So I think there are some other entrants in the AI legal space, I
Just a
believe.
couple.
And so you have some perspective on how to stand out. It's obvious you know how to stand out. And as you're thinking about it, how do you make how do you position your product? How do you make it memorable amidst all the other legal products, but also just the AI noise in the system? And how have you differentiated, how have you balanced differentiating your product with delivering value? And are those the same?
Right. Well, in legal research, in some ways, it's easier maybe than some other spaces, although there are probably spaces that we could think of that are similar in that it's a very odd market in that it's very hard to disrupt, right? So it's one of the most difficult kind of spaces to disrupt and was pretty much perfectly poised to be challenged by AI. And the reason is because there's a few things. So, and again, legal research just means, in case you're wondering what the heck that is, we have laws, obviously, judges make opinions, and then they put out their what they call the case law, and so that is what lawyers need to look at to kind of write their own briefs and make arguments. Then there's of course laws that are like the statutes, regulations, and all those things. So those are kind of the two things. So when you're looking at that vast trove of just sort of written information, right? How it was done in the before times, before like a couple of years ago, the old days, you needed a lot of human beings, right? To look at this case law, put out these things and mine information out of it, right? So that people could say, oh, I'm looking for this, use this, different thing, and just do that deep research. So it was very human centric. And I think one of the things that, stood out to me early. And I mean, 2 years, we've been doing this for 2 years. It literally feels like I've been in this business for like 10,000 years at some point. But when you think back 2 years, I mean, we were using like Gemini model or something. It was really old days. But so this was so new, the thought of not using human beings, right, to do this kind of analysis. So maybe about a year, 6 months or something in, when we had the prototype really running, someone said to us from one of the big companies, like there's a team of 3,000 people in Minnesota that are doing this work. Like your tool is replacing like that number of people who are doing this knowledge work. So not everything will be that easily disruptible. And the other thing about legal space is that there's a duopoly, right? Because of the barriers to entry are so incredibly high. You have Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis, VLEX, which just got sold for $1 billion to Clio. Anyway, so there's not a lot of, there wasn't a lot of very high barriers to entry, right? So it was really ripe for AI and something that could really disrupt something that had been immovable for a long time. So the flip side of that is it's a market with very low risk tolerance. Obviously, you couldn't pick a more difficult environment to say, here's this new tech. We don't really know how it works, but trust us, than attorneys, right? Like that's just really high risk. Similar to, you were talking about like with in the medical.
Harder than health and finance?
Well, no, probably not.
But
But
also
with
hard.
some taking of the worst parts of it, right? Because like the risk of failure is extremely dangerous, right, in the law. So where we started, and when you're talking about sort of adaptability and like the entrepreneurial journey, one thing I would say is like where you start isn't going to be probably anywhere close to where you end or where you end up and you think you know. So for us, we were kind of I guess naive, and in some ways it's good we didn't know everything we've learned about legal research since, otherwise we probably would have never started, to be honest, because it's not easy. But I remember this one day and we're talking about how do you differentiate yourself? So we're out there, we knew our tech was really good, right? So, but who were we, right? We're these two random people from Boston that we're not attorneys, like we don't have some deep experience in legal tech. Like why would anyone pay any attention to us, right? And so what we decided is to just be as disruptive as possible, and we put the tool out for free, which everybody told us we were crazy. And I remember the first few meetings we had, because once we came on the scene, a lot of VCs wanted to talk to us, and then they very quickly said, no, you guys are nuts, like that you're putting this out there for free. But the whole point was to build this trust and to build a user base. And so now we have a paid tool that is extraordinarily, like by a factor of 30, 40, 50 times cheaper than the alternatives. So we went at it with a very mission driven, like I have a background in public health and like very interested in solving problems at scale and access to justice and all this stuff. So we started off thinking we might almost become a nonprofit, right? And then it pivoted. And what we learned along the way is that disrupting with price because we didn't have to take a lot of funding. We didn't have to answer to VCs, no offense to the VCs in the room, but we could kind of do what we wanted. So it gave us the opportunity to charge the price that the thing actually cost instead of trying to get as much money out of it as possible. So the pricing of AI tools in and of itself can be disruptive in and of itself because it's just such a different thing to build. You don't need these bazillions of dollars. And plus, then you can kind of be more your own boss, which is nice. So that is some of the things I've said. And so early on, we thought we were going to be much more direct to consumer. And now, 2 years in, we've realized not at all. We're a tool for attorneys, right? And that's who really needs us. And so how we're going to help scale up, legal service. We are legal information, but our tools can serve people who are providing legal services, is to enable the people who can do the work. So not everything valuable is just direct to consumer. So there's a lot of like really cool enabling, like what you're doing with like using AI to make business processes more seamless. So I guess I would just say, be okay with not knowing what you don't know, because you're going to learn, and whatever you think you were doing, you're probably going to end up doing something slightly different.
Yeah. And there's something to be said. You all were confident, you had experience, but you just went ahead. So,
Well, and yeah, and just to that point, I was talking to someone about this earlier. If you look at a problem, so in legal is just a good example, because most people who are looking at the legal research world, they're looking at it through the eyes of an attorney, right? And as they should, right? They're the ones who use it. They're the ones who understand it. They know the complexities. Super important. And the first people we got on our board were legal librarians, because they know everything, and also just attorneys and people in the legal tech space. So we knew what we didn't know, and we made sure that those people were at the table with us, giving us advice and keeping us from screwing our self over by mistake. But is the idea that if you look at something from a different perspective, and that's kind of what AI can do, is really fascinating. So for us, looking at this vast trove of data and sort of how it's been approached when it's leading with the legal perspective, meant the approaches were kind of always the same. So looking at it from a data perspective or from like an engineering perspective, just parse the problem in a different way that I think is a very interesting opportunity for areas that have been a bit impenetrable to change or disruption. So I think it's the engineers in the room, like you have something really important that you can look at these problems from a different perspective.
Yeah, and Kara is very user focused as well, and that's always going to be really important. But it is just the two of you, and it's not clear if you could have even built the product with tons of people, much less two people. So it's a very different world, but you still have to be focused on the customers.
Right.
Joe and Scott, Joe, maybe how do you differentiate kind of your products in the marketplace? Path AI may be a little more on its own, but some of yours may be how do you introduce the products? And then Scott, you're in the financial services, so you definitely have to think about how to differentiate and explain what you're doing. But Joseph, how do you think about that differentiation from a health perspective?
Yeah, maybe I can touch a little bit on the trust
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of question and kind of weave that in here
That'd be
too.
perfect, actually.
I think if I go back to sort of the Path AI experience, as Doug mentioned, one of the initial resistance that you normally face, and I guess in some of these spaces, we certainly faced there was the resistance from human pathologists who felt like this new technology is going to be replacing them. And I had to learn a lot about pathology, but just like the quick sort of primer thing, it's like the ground truth of medicine. And really, when you watch a pathologist do work, they take a glass slide, put it in under microscope, and they use their eyes and they look at it and they're looking for color expressions, shapes, all these things to identify markers for like cancer. And so they're giving you potentially a life or death decision, and they might spend 3 minutes per slide.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very impactful to the point where often people say you should get a second opinion because depending on the type of cancer, roughly 60% of the time they get it wrong.
And when you're
because they're
waiting
going
for
so
your
quickly.
results, it's because they're waiting for the pathologist to look at the
Pathologist to look
slide.
at it, and it's just backed up and just going through them quickly. It turns out machine learning can just look at colors and pixels, and it's actually so much more accurate and it's much faster. And so that was seen as a threat by a lot of pathologists. And I think that's something that we had to spend a lot of time actually articulating to the pathologists. And one of the terms that we ended up using quite a bit is this idea of human in the loop. And that was so relevant in that space in particular because Path AI's vision was never to replace pathologists. I mean, that would just be a silly thing. The whole idea was to give pathologists more time to have more quality time with patients and actually take their time and look at the edge cases and the things that humans are good at. And so we really had to spend a lot of time framing it as like, this is an aid. This is a thing that's helping you do your work better, get to see more slides and, make more accurate diagnoses to increase, the likelihood that, messages that's being given to patients are accurate. And so that's sort of like, that was like a very important learning for me in that experience. And I think sort of coming to Spectrum AI, different type of sort of applications of AI, but that experience was really helpful because as we work with, they call therapists or just a general term we can use here for simplicity, just like the clinicians who would be using our software, right? So a clinician is like, again, just like a quick primer here. If you don't have experience with this, it's kind of hard to imagine. But like if you have a child and maybe typically developing child, you take them to a primary care physician for an appointment, your typical checkup, it might take 5 minutes if there's nothing, interesting to talk about. On the other hand, if you have a child who is on the autism spectrum, depending on sort of where they fall in the spectrum, that could be like a 6-hour visit, 5 days a week. And so in the first instance, whereas your physician is just saying, oh, how are they doing? Are they making friends at school? What sports? Very quickly, they're just typing stuff in. In the second instance, it's like, I need to observe the child for hours on end. I need to interact with the child. And you need to think about how you manage data in each of those instances. So building a tool that helps the clinicians, like that was an easier sort of sell. There was less of a threat there of like replacing them because their job is just so immersive. And what actually is hugely challenging in this space, it's applied behavior analysis, or ABA. That's sort of the type of therapy that's it's like the gold standard for autism. The biggest challenge in this space is actually what we observed. You know, I actually, when I joined this company, we went and sat in on ABA sessions. We visited clinics, even our board members or VCs that came and watched. And the first thing that becomes obvious is the data is just crap. Like they're not collecting good data because you're so focused on a child.
Yeah.
And yet all of the indications of progress are based on data that's gathered. And so that's sort of why we set out to build the best in class data collection tool for these types of experiences. But that's been
They're
embraced.
aware that there's a gap.
Totally. I mean, we noticed it. I mean, at first, our CEO wanted to build a clinic. And then we went and sat in and we realized, hang on a second, you can't change the industry, because as you watch the clinicians do their work, you realize some of them don't even collect any data until after a 6-hour session, and they have 30 minutes and they have to fill in the gaps about everything that happened. Right. And so they really embraced our technology because it was tech forward. We're using a camera, we're putting machine learning on top of it, where you can actually analyze interactions and you can see what happened and fill in the gaps with a clinician so they can actually have a much more focused session with your clients. And so less resistance in that space than I would say in my previous experience at Path AI, where clinicians felt a lot more sort of threatened by
Perfect.
that technology.
And what Joe's illustrated, and Kara and Scott, you can touch on, is what we've seen at MIT is, and we've always seen this. People come out of the labs, and the frameworks that we advocate are all go to the customer. So people want to build the product, they can kind of do it. Sometimes the technology people, they can do it from their laptop. They don't have to actually talk to people, but the insights are all with the people. So you have hypotheses, and the real insights is when your hypotheses are disproven and you learn something else, like Joseph just illustrated. So I'm developing AI tools to help entrepreneurs, really automating the core MIT frameworks. But the thing that it's really forced is it starts with who are your customers, segmenting the market. So it forces all the users to start right there. And what we advocate is use the tools to spend more time with human beings. So use the technology we're getting to spend more time and build more insights to help human beings once you understand what their problems are. So for Path AI, there was a set of problems for the pathologists where you could help them. And then in autism, you had other ones. And so when you focus there, so when we pull people out of the labs, and what's great is the lab people really embrace it. Once they start to do it, once they get comfortable making those, they get addicted. And then that's what everybody sitting here, your win, no matter what you're doing, is to understand the customers, not understand what your boss wants, not understand what you're doing internally. The great companies are all focused on the customer, and you want to be in a great company, and you want to either participate in that or make sure your company's that way. And Scott's in financial services. That's an area where you could just retreat in, connect the pipes, but the winners there, as you know, are focused on the customers. And you picked off, sounds like the loan side, but you'll talk more about it. But if you could talk about the customers, your segmentation, and then how the heck how do you think about pricing, since you also had the CEO hat?
I think one of the things I wanted to say first to is kind of maybe provide a glimpse into a thought exercise you can do related to finding your ideal customer or thinking about differentiation. Financial services is a really tough walled garden to climb into. And similar to your company, my co-founder and I we are not from banks. We definitely have worked in fintech and worked on the edges, but we certainly don't. We came into it more from an engineering perspective. And we're like, how can we facilitate better data for these users? And there's plenty of products out there that claim to do that. And so the noise in the market is quite deafening. And so one of the things that's emerging for me is when we're thinking about ideal customer profile is really this idea of building a community. So if you go into it with this attitude that we actually need to build a community around use cases and around value, you start realizing that just building a product doesn't have the ability to build a community. You have to really be addressing pain points, and you have to be addressing pain points with consequences. Communities are built around consequences, and so like consequences being like, if we don't grow this bank this year, our board is going to fire the CEO. And so we've approached differentiation from that perspective. Like, how do we build a community? And it's changed some of our behaviors around how we look at potential competition, or when we look at product features. And we, just realize, like, the day we stop talking to a customer is the day we sort of lose touch with building a community.
Is your community, I'm guessing hoping it's not just the bank presidents? Is it the loan officer? Who's your community? Is it you with a bunch of bank presidents all day, or
no? I think
are they the
it
ones that
evolves.
you're at the keyboard?
Yeah, I think it evolves over time. And I mean, one of our first objectives is to give credit risk analysts a superpower, right? Because they're sitting behind this pile of paperwork. And similar to your example, they get a loan opportunity comes in, and as a business, you get a quick look. That, by the way, it took 2 weeks for it to hit that pile. And now they're going to look at it over the course of maybe 1 or 2 days.
Yep.
And for some loans, they have to go really deep and underwrite all aspects of like what you are and what you do. But after you get that look, it's gone. And so these analysts are just under a tremendous amount of pressure to move quickly, work fast. And so any kind of advantage you can give them helps to lighten their load. So first our communities around giving superpower to these credit risk analysts, which sounds like a really esoteric random job that exists out there. But focusing first is so important when you kind of are thinking about building your tech and not boiling the ocean. You certainly could pick another person to be your champion, but I don't think you end up with something that acutely addresses a pain point with consequences. So if you're thinking about differentiation, you're thinking about understanding your ideal customer profile, kind of think about the thought exercise of what community are we building and who is in that community and how are we serving them, and it kind of
And
changes.
they're
your
probably
perspective.
lonely there in their bank with a few of them, and you're somebody who can then join across that, and you understand across, and that's the opportunity if you can really deeply understand what they're doing.
That's right. And so that kind of leads to like the pricing question, which I know, how does that lead to a pricing question? But I think in this age of AI, the traditional way of buying software is shifting. So the last decade, Salesforce won the markets off this idea of software as a service, which is essentially buying ahead future potential value and capacity. So people would buy tiers in the software for a certain amount of volume, and they'd prepay for it. And so if I was buying Salesforce, I might pay for, I might say, well, my team's 12 people today, and they're going to be 100 by the end of the year, and I'm trying to grow. And so, yeah, Salesforce, I'm going to buy 100 seats, and so I'm going to be at that tier, but I got to grow into it. And so as economies change, things flip. What AI is driving is much more consumption-based. And so I'm going to just pay for what I get. And that means you need to be able to measure what I get. And so because, again, another dynamic that's changing is a lot of the past 10 years have been software solutions that have been systems of record. We've spent the last decade building information architecture and bringing information to people, which has been useful, very, very helpful. But we've immediately shifted to systems of action, meaning like, don't just give me information, do something about it, especially if you could have done something about it. Like if you could have told me that this person has a specific type of cancer before this information arrived to a person, please tell me that. Or please give me the percentage likelihood that that's the case. That's very important information. Now, if you need to email some of the doctors involved, please email some of the doctors involved so they are aware of that information. Don't wait for a person to do that. So So we're in this world now of like digital actionability around data, which means now our systems can do tasks for us and predict and anticipate needs in a way that didn't happen before. And so when I go to pay for that, I'm likely paying on the outcome of those actions and how we value those actions. And so we started to look at pricing based on how we measure those actions, and we start getting to tasks and jobs that people used to do, and we start talking about the net value of those jobs happening faster, and we start getting evaluated off of this concept of like, well, what is a full-time individual cost to do this task versus what we can do with a agentic system that never sleeps and always reacts to that next thing no matter what time of day it is. And so we tend to price off of actions and activities that can be performed. We benchmark that pricing against the FTE cost of what you could do that in the market. And generally, the net present value is greater because you can operate 24/7. This has implications on the perception that AI is taking jobs, and there are some jobs that AI takes. However, if you sit down with a credit analyst after they've used the technology for the first time, you can see in their face just the excitement around how they're going to use this to elevate their career. And I think this, and it would also just serve customers better. And so I think there are net benefits. There are jobs that will be taken, like you talked about the 3,000 person call center, probably doing data facilitation and data searching, like literally querying, on computers. Those jobs definitely will go away, but I think there's new jobs, new things that are created. But pricing based on net present value benchmarked against human equivalents.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And the human in the loop, I hear, certainly Joe stated it, you stated it, the credit analyst is probably still the only one in the bank that's got enough experience to actually look at what you produce. And same thing with the lawyers ultimately. It doesn't go directly to the client. Someone's looking at it, but doing it quicker. And I think also in each case, people are queued up, so things are being held back in the areas that you've looked at. So those are always good places to start where something's hard, and look for queue backlogs and things. Yeah.
You have one more thing to add there. Like if you're looking to start a business, just go do research, around certain types of like highly specialized jobs and look at the data behind how many open roles there are in the United States every single year for the past 10 years. Credit analysts, there's 36,000 credit analyst jobs open every year. They're never filled. And it slightly grows by about 3% a year.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that tell you? There's like massive opportunity in the marketplace to create value by filling those roles with something. They wouldn't be open. They're not open for, just for excitement. The CEOs aren't putting those open for reasons. So I think that like there are highly specialized tasks out there that generally have a lot of demand, and AI is going to help facilitate that demand, which unlocks the capacity and the potential of our economy at scale. And you start adding more people using digital people to the economy. Our economy becomes bigger because of that.
Great.
Can I just add, like from a sort of unmet need perspective, or like a latent market perspective or something like that, we think about what needs are not being met. So in this, it's from the workers, right? Like there aren't enough workers in that to fill those roles who need to do that work. So things are even slower and more gunked up, right? And legal is like exactly that, but even like at a hyper scale, right? If you look at like the legal needs that are unmet in this country, depending on like income level, it goes between 92% and about 50% of legal services are not met. So you could look at that from both perspectives as like a disgusting humanitarian sort of failing that we have as a society, that there's so many people who need legal support and don't get it. Like that's terrible. But then from the other side, you can be more, put on your capitalist hat and say, wow, there is a lot of opportunity there to build and create solutions, because if there's that much unmet need, like there are solutions that can be built. And because of things like AI, it's all of a sudden a different space. So just looking at it from that perspective, where are there like large gaps between sort of supply and demand, are just prime spaces to dig in.
Can I ask a question? Is it
Sure.
possible? How many people have ever been denied a business loan out of the group? No one? So one of the reasons, there's plenty of reasons why you'd be denied a business loan, but let's say you need $25,000 to $50,000, small business line of credit. You go to your local bank. One of the reasons why you might get denied is just because it's too expensive to manage that loan at that bank. Like the cost of carrying that loan, processing it, underwriting it, and doing this thing called portfolio managing the loan over its lifetime just exceeds the margin that they'll get on the loan. So they just won't do it. And so when you apply AI and you can like underwrite that loan in a day instead of 5 days, you can portfolio that manage that loan in 5 minutes instead of 5 hours or 3 days of people time. Now suddenly you're making money off of these loans and you're lending them to the community, and your community is flourishing. There's so much capital on the sideline. People always talk about like, oh, there's so much dark capital on the sidelines. Well, a lot of it's not deployed because it's too expensive to deploy, especially to Main Street. That's like one of the areas that benefits the most, I think, from agentic approaches to lending. So I bet the same thing is in legal and in medical as well. Like just the cost of processing something is too expensive, or the cost of supporting that client or addressing that backlog.
So looking at the flows is always good. The customer journey and how products are processed. We're getting, it's about 20 after. We got 10 minutes. I have a whole list of more questions, but you're the audience. Do any of you all have questions that you want to ask this elite panel? So yes, and we've got microphones for you. So ask away.
Perfect. All right. So this is a bit of a bizarre question for standing out in the AI crowd. What do you do when you have too many differentiators? So you're just trying to pick which is going to be most relevant. So in my specific case, I'm an ed tech, a combination of ed tech and AI. And I'm just trying to figure out what is going to really stand out to I have a tutoring company that I made myself. It's like, if you're at all familiar with the space, it's like Wisent, but like I'm trying to make it 10 times better. The point is, I'm trying to figure out, is it being cheaper? Is that what's going to differentiate it? Is it having better tutors? Is it having the more personalized learning, or any of the other features that I'm working to create? Creating a store to have like sticky and more gamification. That's also very important in the ed tech and like learning space. So I'm curious about that. What would someone, and like this obviously applies to any business, try and like narrow down into the more specific and niche, like you talked about, for example?
Kari, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll offer a.
Because you probably could have 20,
Yeah.
50 different things to focus on.
Yeah, and I think I'll go back to what Scott was saying earlier, is you really need to identify the pain point in the right way. And so, you can identify a pain, but if it's not that big of a consequence, right, it's not going to create a very valuable or long-lasting company, because you may be solving a problem, but it's not a big enough problem for anyone to necessarily care and for it to become a big successful thing. So spending the time, and Scott could probably speak to this more because he's the one who said it, but really identifying that pain point and how important it is in the market, I think is a good place to start. And if you don't know, you keep researching, right? I mean,
Yeah, just a quick thought exercise on that. How many people here need to be home by a particular time because a significant other needs them at home?
yes.
And how many people will have a consequence if they're not home by that time?
Well, it's a really
Like-
small number. So
Like,
yeah.
there's a burning need right there, and so with a consequence. And so like similarly in your ed tech example, finding a burning need is great. Maybe it's about remote learning, maybe it's about access to materials, but then there's someone within your community that if they don't use one of your features, suffers.
So focus on the problem you're solving, not the feature. In the MIT framework, there's 24 steps. The first 5 are all customer. The 24th step is a product plan.
Right.
So to help you exactly through that process. And wasn't going to do this, but you can go to Orbit, and there's a wait list. If you put Startup Boston, I can get you on it. But that's really the thing, is really understanding from your customer what they can't live without, and what's just, oh, by the way, and understanding the end user and understanding the economic buyer and splitting those up. So in healthcare, often physicians can use um, in the hospitals could use some new features. In fact, they champion them. But unless the CFO okays it, a hospital is really run on ROI, not on outcomes, unless the outcomes affect ROI. So it's a sad truth of it. So you got to work those two. And so as you're looking at pain points, make sure you're thinking about the pain points for the end user, and then make sure they matter to the person who's going to write the check.
And this is going to sound really strange in an AI presentation, but one way to differentiate yourself is to figure out where the human is most important, right? So there are, yes, you can automate everything to the end of time, but there may be places in your value chain or in your go to market kind of space that the human makes a really big difference. And you think about parents, you think about if it's people with their children and stuff, like there may be a point that you could really, that's important, and that's the conversion point. So just to not just say AI just for AI, but like really think about where that you could have that value add by still having a human.
Yes, and that's what we do with our startup tools is there are other startup tools producing business plans and things, and we've done is really focus on making it easy to iterate under the assumption your first assumption or the AI is going to be wrong, but we're going to help you think through the problem and iterate on it quickly as you learn things. Other questions?
Yeah, hi. Can see me. Hi, my question is for Joseph. So, in the pathology example that you mentioned, right? So when you position yourself as a tool to assist in whatever decision making, what have you found out, like in terms of the user, which is in this case a doctor or a pathologist? What level of final decision making do they want to rely on the AI model or the tool? Like, do they want to reserve the final decision to themselves, or do they want an answer and then apply their thinking on it?
Yeah, no, that's a that's a good question, and it's one that we certainly had to contend with. Ultimately, at least within the context of that company, like our approach was to build technology that provided the information to the clinician, so the clinician will have the ultimate decision. So even if it's just like, I'm just gonna very simplify it. Like, this is cancer, this is not cancer, but still like a thumbs up, right? Like the clinician still has to like do the final sign off, and not have the machine learning be the thing that actually made the like you could look at it like we built a whole like interface where it actually simplified the whole process, and you could see it, and it'll tell you, you know, basically all the information that you need to have make the final determination. If you needed to, you could always go in and do more. But I think that's a very important sort of question to ask, not even just within the context of that experience, but just in it could be broadly applicable, right? Just thinking about what is the role that you want the technology to play. The other reason why that was an important question for us is because we were also developing something that could become a medical device. And so the FDA gets involved, and the FDA has very specific opinions about, how do medical devices work, and what is the role of a human versus a technology. And so all of that stuff gets factored in.
In just thinking about the tech, you might have thought, just give it the answer quickly
Exactly.
and you're done. But understanding how people are really thinking and being able to see the evidence is how you get it right. Other questions?
So staying on the pathology example, the hurdle to get over people to adopt when they're viewing the AI as something that could replace them as opposed to augment their work, using the human in the loop analogy that you used. There are other humans in the loop too that sometimes view it more as a business, and rather than seeing it as they can have more free time to do more interesting, more targeted work, how do you assuage their fears that they just won't be told, well, if you have that much time, you can see more patients? Do you see what I'm saying with that? It can the other humans in the loop have other drivers. Do you feel like there's any way to help put those fears to rest?
Yeah, I'll touch briefly on it, and I'm sure Scott and
Yeah, I
Karen
think
can
Scott,
also
you'd have a good-
also add to it, because I think this is like broadly applicable, and actually the best example for to answer your question isn't actually from my experience at Path AI. It's actually from my experience at Spectrum AI, because in the ABA field with autism care, a lot of these providers are actually owned by private equity firms, and who are just who are trying to come up with good outcomes, but at the same time they're also operating businesses, and so hours and margins and all of these things are really important. And so trying to figure out, one of the biggest challenges was like trying to figure out the messaging for each member of the organization. Oftentimes the clinician is the one who engages with us because they see our product and they love it, how much it's going to make their jobs easier, because they hate the technology that they're using. They're all bad, they love ours, but they're not the person who writes a check to buy it. The message that we send to the operations person is very different, because that person is looking at financial numbers, and so we need to reframe the message in terms of, this is how much this is how much revenue you're making per hour, and we're going to save you X amount of hours. What you do with those hours, that's up to you, right? And then there's a compliance person, which is the person that gets involved when they submit a claim to the insurance company and the insurance company declines it because something was missing. So I think this is more like a broad sort of like a business concern, and I don't even think that it's specific to ABA, but yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, pathology, but I just wanted to share.
Perfect. And Scott, I think we got one last question. We'll send it your way.
Okay.
But this really points out, you need to understand the user, so the pathologist assistant didn't hate it, but who's going to pay the check and who's the champion. So really living, you all probably did it. I usually lived where my customers, we had data center products, and I lived at Verizon Wireless and saw what was going on, and we were providing monitoring, and they said we were making fancy pictures, which was needed for the economic buyer, and they said no one ever looks at that. We look at the alerts, and it was great. You just can't get that insight unless you're working with the customers. Here's our last question. Make it a good one.
Sure. So you've all talked about very busy target users that you're going after, trying to support. I'll direct this to you, Kara, because there's a lot of parallels between your startup and ours.
Okay.
We're not in law, though. So we spent a year and a half building the business and the technology. We recently launched, and we've validated it. We know it's people are blown away by what we do, but we're now in the go-to-market phase. What did I guess what did you do to reach these very busy people? How do you get in front of them to be able to convince them of your solution?
Yeah.
What's the go-to-market
Yeah,
strategy?
it's really not easy. So do you have a marketing person on your team or a communications person? Okay, good. That's already step one, because it's often a place that it feels easy to not spend the money there, but don't make that mistake. And a lot of it is very authentic in the law. Like we were, I don't know if this is necessarily something I would recommend other people do, but it was super boots on the ground, and it was relationship building, and it was bringing in advisors who had big relationships already. So it was like really tapping into that network and getting super into the network in Boston. Maybe you can tell me later what your clients are,
And
because
finding those watering holes. and
yeah,
things like
yeah.
that.
And Boston's a small town. We think we're a big city. We are in some ways, but we're a small town. Everybody knows each other. So like there is no way I could say that beating the street is not like, so whoever on your team is like wants to be out and about, like get them out and about. But
More of an online market.
it's an online market. Okay. Yeah. So we'll think about your founders, right? If your founders have interest in that. But it really depends on your market, I guess, who would say, but how do you reach those people? Because there's definitely ways, but I don't know if some other folks.
But if they're too busy to take a call or to hear.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts? I
And
mean, your people are all super
I
busy.
think we're
They're-
hitting the
Yeah.
deadline. That's
Oh.
What you asked for was, how do you reach the people? How do you reach the credit analysts? I believe we can go outside. I think the next session's in, but you can ask us questions afterwards. And we all have experience in really specific markets. So it's a great across the board. But thank you all for lending your insights, and thank you all for being with us for the last hour here.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much to the speakers. This was a lovely panel. Thank you so much. Yeah, unfortunately, we have had a hard stop at 6:30. So just a couple things in the closing notes. The Massachusetts Climate Tech Studio Finale is happening right now in the first floor. So if you're interested, you can go check it out. And then Three Circle Studio is our official photographer. So you have a photographer here right now taking photos. So there's a QR code outside, which if you haven't signed up already, you can sign up for, and you can download your customized photos in which you're all, whatever photos in which you're tagged in, you can download using that QR code. And I know you want to mingle, and that is encouraged, but then we will have to reset this space for Suffolk right now. So we request that you take the mingling outside this room, and that's it. Thank you so much, and I will see you all again tomorrow.